You know, quality aside, Electronic Arts was never known for its ambition. For years, it was a publisher focused on playing it safe, seemingly too preoccupied with annual sequels and sports games to bother with anything new or different. And while its approach was certainly profitable, it also branded the company with a critical stigma. Creativity was the last thing you expected from EA. And then this happened. Electronic Arts, the vanilla company with a vanilla portfolio, took a chance on something different. It finally broke its pedestrian gameplay paradigm. And all it took was a leap of faith. If nothing else, Mirror's Edge is precisely that, something different. To ascribe it to a specific genre would be difficult, but in a broad sense, you could call it a first-person adventure, a term commonly applied to games like Metroid Prime, and yet in that light, even first-person adventure seems to miss the mark. In fact, what Mirror's Edge really amounts to is a sort of first-person platformer. You play as the aptly named Faith, a colorful rebel in a city whitewashed in both appearance and government. A totalitarian leadership has left the city in an utterly decayed state. A glossy, polished shell of oppressive whiteness hides a corruption that festers beneath its surface. And Faith is a runner, a nimble revolutionary who defies the status quo in hopes of destroying it. The runners act as sort of carrier pigeons, delivering messages between like-minded rebel groups, and they stay off the grid by running above it, dashing across rooftops and leaping across the horizon in a mesmerizing gymnastics routine 100 stories high. The agility of the runners is framed both narratively and aesthetically by their austere surroundings, creating a sense of acrobatic elegance that defines Mirror's Edge. Linear in their design, each level is essentially an obstacle course. It's your job to guide Faith through the city, using her remarkable knack for running and jumping to keep her out of harm's way. And in that sense, Mirror's Edge feels very much like a first-person platformer. The game is designed entirely around the idea of finding optimal routes and racing through the levels as quickly as possible. And although Faith's escape routes are certainly defined by their grace and elegance, speed is just as important. When heavily armed blues are in pursuit, you don't have much time to think. Mirror's Edge is more about creating and reacting, and when Faith really gets moving, the game's flow has an almost hypnotic rhythm. Of course, that hypnotic quality is accentuated by the game's aesthetics. Now, at its core, Mirror's Edge is simply a platform game designed for speedruns, but it also has a spectacular sense of style and elegance, and that defines the game as much as running across walls or jumping from cranes. The graphics, the music, it all comes together to create a distinct and immersive overall experience. And yet, perhaps the most refreshing thing about Mirror's Edge is its approach to violence. Faith can disarm pursuant blues and use their weapons against them, but more importantly, she doesn't have to. You can play Mirror's Edge from start to finish without shooting at a single enemy, a stark deviation from most first-person console games that feels as rewarding as it does fresh. Few games are without flaws, and Mirror's Edge certainly has a few smudges on the glass. The game runs a little short, and aside from some time trials, there isn't much for Faith to do once the game is over. But there's something to be said for invention. There's something to be said for doing something different. Within its largely colorless library, Electronic Arts finally made room for a little color with Mirror's Edge, a fittingly metaphorical splash of reds and blues, and an industry covered in white.